having some knowledge of how the eye works, because that's what a camera is. It's kind of like an eye for us, helps us make our films. So persistence of vision is basically, if you take a look at this thing, our eyes, if you remember biology class, looks at images and it's upside down. But the back of our eyes actually are like film. It leaves an impression. That impression is then interpreted by the brain. Now, that impression, which is, again, cameras kind of simulate this, that impression isn't perfect. You know, we have limitations to what we can see. We can't see infrared, for example. We can't see, like, you know, microwaves. We see a very small spectrum of what's out there. But what's something that's important to keep in mind is how long it stays back there. It's called the persistence of vision because when you see something, there's an impression that it leaves and it lingers there for a little bit. And your brain only processes at a certain speed. Now, in film, we think about frames per second. So how many frames per second, hint, it's up there, to fool the human brain into thinking something is moving? 24. 24 at a very early point was a threshold we figured out that works for film, that our human brains feel that, you know, if I take a picture here and a frame here, it feels like it's moving. 24 frames per second was established very early on, but it's not the only standard. Like you mentioned 30 frames per second, and then I mentioned that Peter Jackson and James Cameron are advocating shooting at an even higher frame rate, like 48 frames or 60 or beyond. And cameras these days can shoot at those rates. So why 24 FPS? It's just history, also frame rates, and also what the human brain can perceive. We could do less, we could do more, but that was a standard that was established with film very early. Now 30 frames per second is because NTSC, and it's actually not 30. Do you know what it is? It's 29.97 frames per second. I know this because I had to deal with it when I worked at ILM. We did something called 4:3 film lookup, which converts from 24 frames to 30. And I'm not going to get into the technique of you drop a frame here and the sound sync. And anyway, frames per second is something important, even to this day, important to keep in mind. As a cinematographer, as a sound guy, as a post guy, you got to know this stuff ahead of time. Okay, and these are just the basics. Okay, so let's go through some basics of photography. Like how many of you guys have played with some of the manual settings on your camera? All cameras have this stuff. I know cinematographers have. I know people who play. Okay, if you never have, try it. It's fun and it's frustrating. Like when I play with the settings, my photography looks like crap because I'm just like, oh, this doesn't work, or this, you know. But this is the stuff even today's digital technology has inherited. But it started with film. So something called shutter speed started with film. Shutters is, you know, how fast your shutter, you know, when you take a picture, the exposure to the frame, to light. So the faster the shutter speed, the more like small amount of light is allowed. The like 1/15 of a second, you're going to get more exposure, but that also means what? See the exposure there? It means more blur because your camera, and then I won't get into ISO and all those, this is very basic, but if you have a longer exposure, you're going to see more blur. And sometimes you want that. It's called motion blur. It looks really cool. Something else to consider is aperture. How much you know, a camera works like an iris. So it's not just how fast it opens and closes, but how big it opens and closes. So again, it's about light. And you control these things, you know. It could be a combination of how much it opens and how fast it opens. That has an effect of the quality of your image. All of these things, shutter speed, aperture, even though we use digital technology, we still do these things. And this is the stuff that if you want to make movies, even if you want to make your little iPhone video, which we'll talk about soon, knowing these things are going to help you give better images. And better images is what it's about. I mean, in terms of the polish. Nothing beats a good story or good acting. That's still the best and most important thing.